My parents forced me to babysit my younger siblings instead of letting me have a childhood, and now they're shocked that I want nothing to do with them. Have you ever felt like your childhood was stolen from you? Like your parents expected you to grow up too fast and carry burdens that weren't yours to bear? That's exactly what happened to me. I was the oldest sibling, and instead of enjoying my childhood, I was thrust into the role of a full-time babysitter. While my friends were out playing, laughing, and living life, I was stuck at home, taking care of my younger siblings day in and day out. My parents made it clear that their needs came first: my happiness, my freedom, my youth. Those didn't matter. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just part of being the oldest. But as the years went by, it became clear that this wasn't normal. I was expected to act like an adult long before I even understood what that meant. The late nights, the endless chores, the responsibility, it was all on my shoulders. I never had time for my own interests, never got to enjoy simple things like hanging out with friends or pursuing hobbies. My life revolved around my siblings, and my parents seemed to think that was just fine. As I got older, I started resenting it more and more. I began to realize how much of my life I had lost, all because my parents couldn't seem to prioritize me as their child. The frustration built up until I finally reached a breaking point. I began to pull away, distancing myself from them emotionally and physically. I didn't want to play the role of the dutiful babysitter anymore. I wanted to be me, not just a caretaker. And now, after all these years of putting my needs last, my parents are shocked. They don't understand why I'm distant, why I've kept my distance from them for so long. They can't seem to grasp that their choices have had consequences. But here's the thing, they never saw it coming. And honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready to explain it to them just yet. So, how did we get to this point? What exactly happened that caused this rift? Stick around, because this story is far from over. Growing up, I was the kind of kid who just wanted to be left alone to do my own thing. I had dreams, interests, and hopes for my future, just like any child should. But instead, I was always told that I had to step up and help take care of my siblings. It wasn't just babysitting in the sense of an hour or two here and there, it was constant. From the moment I got home from school, my day was all about them. Feeding, bathing, entertaining, and making sure they were safe, it became my life. Looking back, I can't remember the last time I had a break. My parents would go out for hours, leaving me in charge of 2 toddlers. I wasn't allowed to have a social life. I wasn't allowed to go to sleepovers or hang out after school like the other kids did. And every time I tried to speak up, it was always brushed aside. "You're the oldest, it's your job," they'd say, like it was some sort of badge of honor. But no one ever asked what I wanted. No one ever considered how draining it was to be constantly responsible for people who weren't even my own age. The resentment started building up slowly, like a pressure cooker. At first, I just tried to push through, telling myself it was temporary. Once they get older, things will be different, I thought. But as the years passed, I realized this was never going to change. My parents relied on me more than ever, and with each passing year, the responsibilities grew heavier. It wasn't just watching them anymore, it was organizing their entire lives. Their school projects, their doctor's appointments, even their social events, it was all on me. And the worst part? My parents never seemed to notice how exhausted I was. They'd come home, tell me how proud they were of how well I was taking care of things, and then go back to their own lives. I was stuck in this endless cycle, never getting the recognition I deserved. But all they saw was that I was mature and responsible. It wasn't until I started pushing back that they finally seemed to notice the strain. But by then, it was too late. They just couldn't understand why I was so distant, why I was no longer willing to be the perfect child they had always wanted. And I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth, to make them understand the years of resentment I had bottled up. So instead, I kept my distance. The more I pulled away, the more they demanded, and the more I realized that we were stuck in a cycle that would never break. As the years dragged on, it became more and more clear to me that my parents didn't see me as their child anymore. I wasn't their daughter, I was their unpaid nanny, their live-in helper. Even my friends started noticing it. They'd ask me why I couldn't hang out or go out to the movies like they did. I'd always have an excuse, and they would shrug it off, but deep down, I knew I was missing out. I could see the happiness in their faces, the freedom they had to just live. It was a constant reminder of everything I didn't have. My siblings were still so young, and honestly, I didn't resent them. They didn't ask for this life either. They were just kids, but the weight of caring for them felt like a responsibility I never signed up for. As they grew older, they became more self-sufficient, but my parents kept piling on new tasks for me. By then, it was like they had forgotten how to be parents. They were always busy with their own work, their own plans. There were times when I wished I could scream at them, tell them how trapped I felt, but I couldn't. I was supposed to be the strong one, the one who didn't need help, the one who could always handle it. But then came the breaking point. It was my senior year of high school, and I had dreams of going to college. I had worked so hard to get there, to earn my place, but every time I started to make plans for myself, something would come up. A sick sibling, a school project, a doctor's appointment. It was always something. I was so burned out by this point that I couldn't even remember the last time I had done something just for me. My parents were excited about my future, sure, but they still expected me to stay behind, to take care of everything. I couldn't do it anymore. I started applying for colleges in other states, places far enough away that they couldn't just drop by or make me come home on a whim. But instead of supporting my decision, my parents reacted with shock and anger. They couldn't understand why I would want to leave them. "Why would you leave us now?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. "We need you." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. They truly believed I was supposed to be there forever, that I owed them my life for all the sacrifices they made. In that moment, everything that had been building up inside me spilled over. I wanted to scream, to tell them how unfair it had been, how much I had given up for them. But I couldn't. Instead, I just walked away from the conversation, feeling numb. They didn't get it. They didn't understand the weight of the years I had spent living for them instead of living for myself. And now, months later, with college just around the corner, they still don't get it. They still don't see why I've pulled away. My parents think I'm just being rebellious, that I'm upset for some petty reason. They don't realize that I'm trying to reclaim the years I lost. But they're not ready to hear it. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to tell them. As the days passed and my departure for college loomed closer, the tension in the house became unbearable. It was like walking on eggshells. My parents, still not fully accepting what was happening, would make little comments here and there. They'd remind me how much I was needed at home, how they couldn't imagine managing without me. The guilt trips, the manipulation, they had been so subtle before, but now they were impossible to ignore. Every time I even mentioned packing or making plans, it felt like a slap in the face to them. My younger siblings were starting to notice the change too. They didn't quite understand why I was pulling away, but they could sense the shift. They'd ask why I wasn't hanging out with them as much or why I didn't want to help with the chores. I wanted to tell them that I needed a break, that I couldn't keep being their caretaker anymore. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. They were just kids, after all, and I didn't want to burden them with my feelings. One night, just a week before I was set to leave, my dad sat me down for a serious talk. His face was stern, but there was something else there too, something that felt like desperation. He told me he didn't understand why I was throwing everything away, why I was leaving them when they needed me the most. He said that he and my mom were getting older, and that they couldn't keep up with everything like they used to. "You're the only one we can count on," he said, his voice trembling. I could feel the weight of his words, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt anger rise up in me. All those years of being the one who had to do everything, all the times I had been expected to sacrifice myself, suddenly hit me in that moment. It wasn't just about leaving them, it was about finally standing up for myself, about finally saying that I wasn't going to live my life for someone else anymore. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain everything I had bottled up for so long? The resentment, the frustration, the years of being invisible? My mind was racing, trying to find the right words to break through the years of silence. But before I could say anything, my mom came in, and the moment was gone. They both looked at me like they were waiting for me to give them an answer they could understand. I felt suffocated, like I was trapped in a room with no way out. I went to bed that night feeling more conflicted than ever. Part of me wanted to give in, to stay, to keep doing what I'd always done for them. But another part of me, something that had been growing stronger and stronger these past few months, was screaming that I couldn't. I wasn't their caregiver. I wasn't their slave. I was their daughter, and I deserved a chance to live for myself. The next few days were filled with arguments, silent treatments, and guilt. My parents tried everything they could to change my mind, but I had made up my mind. Or so I thought. The morning of my departure finally arrived, and I was packing the last of my things, ready to leave this part of my life behind. My parents were quieter than usual, but I could see the sadness in their eyes. The tension was unbearable, and I could feel the weight of the choice I was about to make. And then, just as I was about to walk out the door, my dad stopped me. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it stopped me in my tracks. "Is this it? Are you really leaving us?" he asked, his words cutting deeper than I could have ever imagined. The question hung in the air, and I stood there, frozen. The decision I had been avoiding for years had come to this moment. But I couldn't answer him, not yet. The storm inside me was too strong, and I could feel everything I had held back bubbling to the surface. Would I walk out? Would I stay? Would I finally say what I had been holding in all this time? The silence between us was deafening, and in that moment, I didn't know what would happen next. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. My dad's question hung in the air, and for a split second, I felt like I was losing control of everything. I could see the pleading in his eyes, hear the unspoken desperation in his voice. I wasn't just leaving for college anymore, it felt like I was abandoning them entirely. But I couldn't go back. Not now. Before I could muster the words to respond, something unexpected happened. My younger brother, who had been quietly playing in the corner of the room, suddenly burst out crying. It was a sharp, desperate cry that pierced through the tension. My heart sank. I turned to look at him, and he was standing there, face streaked with tears, eyes wide and confused. "Why are you leaving?" he sobbed. "Why can't you stay with us?" In that moment, it felt like everything I'd been trying to protect myself from came crashing down. My brother's innocent question cut deeper than anything my parents had said. The guilt hit me like a wave, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was the one to blame. How could I explain to him, how could I explain to any of them, that I needed to live my own life, that I needed to be me again? I knelt down to his level, trying to gather myself, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I just hugged him tightly, feeling the weight of all those years pressing against my chest. He clung to me, his little hands gripping my shirt like he was afraid I might disappear. In that moment, it wasn't just about leaving home, it was about leaving him, leaving them all behind. My parents watched from the doorway, their faces a mix of guilt and frustration. Then, just as I was about to stand up, my mom, who had been standing silently in the corner, finally spoke. "You don't understand, do you?" Her voice trembled, but there was an edge to it now. "We've done everything for you. And this is how you repay us?" The words stung, but what she said next left me completely speechless. "We're not the ones holding you back. You've always been the one holding yourself back. Do you really think you can just walk away from us and everything we've done for you?" Her words hung in the air, more like an accusation than a statement. It wasn't just about me leaving, it was about how they saw me. How they had always seen me. I wasn't just the oldest sibling, I was the one who had kept everything together, who had made sure they were okay. And now, in their eyes, I was abandoning them for something selfish. The realization hit me harder than I expected. They thought I was doing this because I wanted to, that I was just being selfish and ungrateful. They couldn't see the weight I had carried for so long, how it had shaped me, how it had left me feeling like a ghost in my own life. I wasn't running away to hurt them, I was running away to save myself. But the words felt impossible to say. Instead, I turned to my brother again, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "I'll always love you," I whispered, though it didn't feel like enough. "But I have to do this. For me." My parents stayed silent. The room was suffocating, the air heavy, with everything left unsaid. As I turned to leave, I heard my dad's voice, softer this time. "Don't think you can just leave us and everything will be fine. You'll regret it, you know." The door clicked shut behind me, but the words stayed with me, gnawing at my insides. I was walking away, but was I making the right choice? I couldn't help but wonder if, deep down, my parents were right. Had I been selfish all along? Would I really be able to walk away from everything I knew and never look back? The drive to college felt like a blur. The world outside was moving, but I was still stuck in that moment, questioning everything I thought I knew. There was no turning back now. But would I regret it? Could I ever undo the damage I had done by walking away? The questions lingered as the distance between me and home grew, and with each passing mile, I felt the weight of my choice pressing heavier on my chest. I arrived at college with a sense of relief and anxiety tangled together, like the quiet before a storm. The campus was so different from home, bright, bustling with energy, and full of possibilities. It was everything I had dreamed of, and yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just left a piece of myself behind. As I unpacked my dorm room, I tried to tell myself that I had made the right decision. I needed this. I deserved this. But a part of me kept replaying the last words my parents had said, the guilt creeping in, whispering that I had thrown it all away. The first few days passed in a blur, a whirlwind of introductions, new faces, and adjusting to a life that was all mine. But then came the text. It was from my mom. I hadn't spoken to them since I left, hadn't even had the courage to call. The message was simple, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. Asterisk, your dad had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. Asterisk, I froze, staring at the screen as if the words could somehow change. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My dad? How could this be happening? I hadn't even been gone a week, and now everything had shifted again. All the guilt, all the unresolved feelings, came crashing back in one horrible moment. I didn't know what to do. What could I do? My first instinct was to hop on the next bus home, to fix everything, but a second thought stopped me. Could I really go back to that life? To the role they had forced on me for so many years? I called my mom, heart pounding. Her voice was trembling, but she tried to sound calm. He's stable now. The doctors are saying it was a close call. We don't know what caused it, but he's going to be okay. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But the weight of her words hung in the air. You need to come home, she added softly. We need you. Your dad needs you. I felt that familiar tug, that pull to be there for them, but the reality of what I had just done, what I had just left, felt too heavy to ignore. I hadn't even had a chance to breathe, to figure out who I was outside of them. The thought of returning felt like falling into an old pattern I had fought so hard to break. The next day, I went to class, trying to focus, but my mind was spinning. The guilt was suffocating, but there was something else too. A strange sense of empowerment. I had made a choice, and while it was terrifying, it was my choice. I had put myself first for the first time in years. And I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't go back to who I was before. Then came the unexpected twist. That evening, just as I was about to settle into bed, I received another message. This one was from my younger brother. Asterisk, Mom said I should tell you. Dad's fine, but there's something else we need to talk about. Asterisk, a strange chill ran through me as I opened the message. What did he mean by that? I called him immediately. His voice sounded shaky when he picked up. Hey, listen. I don't know how to say this, but Mom and Dad are getting a divorce. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was speechless, frozen for a moment as the reality sank in. A divorce? My parents, who had always seemed so solid, so unshakable in their belief that family came first, was this the consequence of all the years of neglect? Was this the breaking point? My brother's voice trembled as he continued. Mom says it's because Dad can't handle everything anymore. They've been fighting for a while, and now I don't know what's going to happen. But it's bad, my name. It's really bad. I sat down on my bed, feeling the weight of everything I had just learned. This wasn't just about me anymore. The cracks in my family were deeper than I had ever realized. My parents had put so much pressure on me, expected so much from me, that they had never taken the time to fix their own issues, their own problems. And now, everything was falling apart. Suddenly, it didn't matter whether I was there or not. The weight of my choice still lingered, but now it was clear I couldn't have fixed any of this. Not by staying, not by trying to play the role they wanted me to play. There was no simple solution. And maybe, just maybe, the hardest part wasn't leaving them, but realizing that I couldn't carry the weight of their brokenness forever. As I looked out of my dorm window, the city lights below twinkling in the distance, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of my childhood. It was the end of something much bigger, an entire way of life, a way of seeing myself and my family. I wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. Whatever was ahead, I knew I could face it, on my own terms. As the days passed, the weight of everything started to settle into something more manageable. I kept in touch with my family, checking in on my dad's recovery and keeping my brother updated on how I was adjusting to college life. The phone calls with my mom were still tense, but they weren't filled with the same guilt as before. She had her own battles to fight now, and so did I. For the first time, our conversations didn't revolve around what I was doing wrong or why I wasn't at home. Instead, we talked about our lives apart, about the changes we were both facing. I had my ups and downs adjusting to college life, but there was something liberating about it all. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to answer to anyone but myself. I made new friends, explored the campus, and began to imagine a future that wasn't tied to the role I had been forced into for so long. I was still figuring out who I was, but every day brought me a little closer to understanding myself outside of my family's expectations. And then, after a few weeks, I got a message from my dad. It was short, but it meant the world to me. *, I'm proud of you. I hope you find what makes you happy. *, those words were a small but significant shift in our relationship. I had spent so many years thinking he would never understand why I needed to leave, but in that moment, I saw a glimpse of his acceptance. It was still complicated, still painful at times, but maybe this was the first step toward healing. My mom, too, slowly started to reach out more, not just to tell me what they needed, but to ask about me. She would tell me about the therapy they were going through, the way they were trying to rebuild themselves after everything that had fallen apart. There was no magic fix, no immediate resolution, but they were trying, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was allowed to be part of my own journey, without it being about fixing anyone else. In the end, I realized that I hadn't just left my family behind, I had started to live for myself. The decision wasn't easy, and it still haunted me sometimes, but I knew it was the only way I could begin to heal. As much as I loved them, I had to carve out my own space in this world. It was my time now. And I wasn't looking back. I still don't know what the future holds for my family, or for me, but one thing I do know is that the choice to leave was the beginning of something new. It was a step toward freedom, toward healing, and toward discovering who I was without the weight of the past on my shoulders. The journey wasn't easy, but it was mine, and that was all I needed to keep moving forward.